Let's play a piece of sound, and then we'll take a few more questions and one or two more calls before we go. But I want to play this. This is Noam Chomsky, who was on Democracy Now!, and he connected the situation with Julian Assange with the imprisonment of Lula. And I just want to emphasize, again, the specific crisis around Assange with these specific charges implicate journalism, period. And the conversation can be as limited as that. And I think Noam Chomsky connects these threads very well. And of course, obviously, the imprisonment of Lula is a very big deal to me in this show. And it was nice to see him use an opportunity to highlight this, as well as the strategic position of Brazil.
The Assange arrest is scandalous in several respects. One of them is just the effort of governments, and it's not just the U.S. government. The British are cooperating. Ecuador, of course, is now cooperating. Sweden before had cooperated. The efforts to silence a journalist who was producing materials that people in power didn't want the rascal multitude to know about. Okay? That's basically what happened. WikiLeaks was producing things that people ought to know about those in power. People in power don't like that, so therefore we have to silence it, okay? This is the kind of thing, the kind of scandal that takes place, unfortunately, over and over. To take another example, right next door to Ecuador, in Brazil, where the developments that have gone on are extremely important. This is the most important country in Latin America, one of the most important in the world. Under the Lula government, early in this millennium, Brazil was maybe the most respected country in the world. It was the voice for the global South under the leadership of Lula da Silva. Notice what happened. There was a coup, soft coup, to eliminate the nefarious effects of the Labor Party, the Workers' Party. These are described by the World Bank, not me, the World Bank, as the golden decade in Brazil's history, with radical reduction of poverty, massive extension of inclusion of marginalized populations, large parts of the population, Afro-Brazilian, indigenous, who were brought into the society, a sense of dignity and hope for the population. That couldn't be tolerated. After Lula's after he left office, kind of a soft coup take place. I won't go through the details, but the last move, last September, was to take the Lula da Silva, the most popular figure in Brazil, who was almost certain to win the forthcoming election, put him in jail, solitary confinement, essentially a death sentence, 25 years in jail, banned from reading press or books, and crucially barred from making a public statement, unlike mass murderers on death row. This in order to silence the person who was likely to win the election. He's the most important political prisoner in the world. Do you hear anything about it? Well, Assange is a similar case.
So obviously I agree with all of that, particularly with Lula, and I want to just underline Professor Wolff. I mean, do you think it's an extreme example, but I mean, is the event of the imprisonment of Lula and these types of maneuvers from the United States to Brazil to India to Hungary, that this is also like part of the reason there isn't the room for the people that are trying to stop Bernie anymore, and I tried to articulate this in my opening, is that there's not enough, well, there's tons of abundance, but if you're going to keep having the kind of market system you have, there is not enough abundance for these compromises anymore. And when there isn't, then the capital class is going to go and migrate to authoritarianism and maybe not put on a nice show of compromise that it might have done in the 90s or the aughts.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is a change in capitalism, a very basic change, been going on particularly since the 1970s, in which, and allow me to develop it just for a moment,
Please.
in which the old centers of capitalism, the place where capitalism grew, England, Western Europe, North America, Japan, these places was where capitalism concentrated. It's where they built most of the factories, the offices, the stores. That's where the struggle with the working class had to come to a compromise that raised wages that were paid for in part by ripping off the rest of the world where standards of living were destroyed, etc. In the 1970s, based on a couple of big technological changes, the jet airplane and the internet, it became possible for capitalists to have, in these old centers, a eureka moment. Why the hell are we here paying high wages to workers when we've created, in the very underdevelopment of the rest of the world, a mass of people who are desperate to work for us for a tenth of the wage? And they began to leave. They left the United States, they left Western Europe, and they left Japan, and they went to Brazil, but they went even more to India, and above all, to China. And the capitalism, that is the employer-employee relationship, took off in China, India, and Brazil. That's why they had, in part, a golden age, because it had a zooming upturn in Brazil, linked to China, by the way. Yep. But it meant that in the old centers of capitalism, the bloom was off the rose. It's over. You're not going back. The center has moved. The dynamic part of capitalism is over there. Not only are the jobs created there, let's give you one statistic. Over the last 20 years, the real wages of Chinese workers have gone up 4 times. In the United States, the real wages of workers have gone absolutely nowhere. They're stagnant. What a spectacular differential. I mean, it dwarfs almost anything else I could think of to talk about the difference. That means that the places where capitalism made the promise, we will deliver you a good standard of living, we will deliver you a massive middle class that will have lots of it's over. They can't do that. The rising middle class of workers is in China and in India and in Brazil, even there. Smaller though. But in where we live, in the United States, it's downhill. And now the struggle isn't share the wealth. It's who's going to take it on the chin as we go down. And those who have it don't want to give it up, which leaves less and less for everybody else. So you need to repress them. You need to deflect their anger onto immigrants or any other scapegoat you can find, because you're driving them in a downward direction, and you don't want them to understand why, because if they did, then the system would be over.
And Lula Libre. You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.